Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wine.com Experiences. I'm Gwendolyn Osborne. Today, we are talking about wine and cheese and pairing the two together. So we'll be tasting some delicious wines from Silverado Vineyards and also tasting those with cheeses chosen by the one and only Laura Werlin. For those of you who submitted some questions beforehand, thank you. As always, we're going to try to incorporate those through our conversation. If you purchase the wines ahead of time to taste along with us, great. Also, if you purchase the cheeses ahead of time to taste along with us, great. Make sure the cheeses are out of the fridge if you have not already. And also make sure those wines get opened up and pour them into some glassware. Well, you don't have to open all of the wines. I think it's fantastic if you can. And remember, these wines will last in your fridge. They will stay fresh. You can enjoy them for the next 2 or 3 days. Just put a cork in them, put them in the fridge. For red wines, just make sure you take them out of the fridge about 20 minutes before you want to enjoy them. You know, just think of this as like a 3-day wine and cheese pairing fest that you get to do. So hopefully you'll be able to enjoy all three listening to us today. If you cannot, this video, as all of our videos, live on the Wine.com YouTube channel, so you can always come back and revisit when you're able to continue your tasting. For these 3 wines that we're tasting, we are going to try to dive into as many tasting notes as we can. But if you're trying to look for a little bit more, please check out these wines on Wine.com. We've got maps, we've got critics reviews, we've got tasting notes. So you'll find a lot more information if you want to dive a little bit deeper there. Speaking of the wines that we are tasting in order will be the Silverado Miller Ranch Sauvignon Blanc, the Silverado Mount George Merlot, and the Silverado Estate Cabernet Sauvignon. The cheeses that are going to go with each, and we'll talk about them on each time. For the Sauvignon Blanc, what's recommended was a goat cheese or a double or triple cream brie. For the Merlot, a gruyere or a goat cheddar, a new one for me, excited about that. And for the Cabernet Sauvignon, a extra sharp cheddar or parmesan. So now let's introduce you to our wine and cheese peoples. We have Russ Weis, President of Silverado Vineyards. Welcome, Russ.
Great to be with you.
Hello, so good to see you, as always. Yes. And then we also have Laura Werlin, who is cheese expert, author, presenter. Thank you so much for being here, Laura.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so excited about this. Okay, so first, I want to kind of talk a little bit about you both, and then we can dive into the pairings. So, Russ, Silverado has such a unique history from its very beginnings. So, could you tell us a little bit about the founding of the winery?
Sure. Well, I think the founding is like so many foundings of all the wineries, sort of born in the modern era in Napa, in the sense that our owners, Ron and Diane Miller, and Diane's mother, Lillian Disney, just came to the Napa Valley and fell in love with it. So that's really not a huge, unique story. A lot of people do that, but maybe just, I snuck that Lillian Disney thing in there. Maybe that's slightly unique. The family that I am so privileged to work for on this great estate is the 3rd generation descendants of Walt Disney. So Diane was Walt's dad.
Got it.
And they came to the Valley in 1976 and scouted out some sites, decided they wanted to start as vineyardists to see if any of the sites were any good. And so they were growing grapes in the mid 70s. And then right about 1980, they kept planting grapes, obviously, but they also planted a little winery on top of the hill here in this historic, right in the middle of Stag's Leap District, before it was Stag's Leap District, actually, before it was the famous place we know now, but on a site that had been originally planted in the early 1870s. So it goes way back. In fact, all 6 of our vineyards, go back to really the founding of Napa after the gold rush, sort of the founding of the Napa wine business after the gold rush. So our earliest one, Mount George, which you're going to have in a little bit, was actually 1868 was when it was first planted. So we're very privileged to be working with some tremendously historic sites.
And all of these sites are yours, right? I mean, I know that it's not unique to come fall in love with Napa and try to invest in it, but that did happen earlier.
Yeah. So Right. So I think that's, that is truly unique because, Ron and Diane and their children, and now their grandchildren, really have this sense of making a great estate. So everything that we do, we're very privileged to do from berry to bottle. So we are thinking about winemaking the minute we start thinking about pruning. Everything that we have is from our own sites. We have six vineyard sites around the southern part of the valley. So the cooler part of the valley, closer to the San Francisco Bay, which is also a big benefit to us because we get a little bit more time to think about things. They don't get quite as hot so fast, those sites. So we're not worried about sugar development. We can take our time with pick decisions and with a lot of the viticulture.
Yeah, and that is, that is, I guess, one way to say it is unique, but that is gives you something a little extra to be entirely estate grown. So for those of you who don't know, estate grown means it comes from the estate owned by the winery. A lot of wineries buy grapes from growers, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's how some of the best grapes are made. That's how growers stay in business. But to be entirely estate owned is different as well.
Yeah, you're right about that. And the way to kind of check that out isn't on the front label of any bottle. You just kind of take a look at the back label, and if it says estate grown, produced, and bottled, then you know that you're dealing with a wine house that grows its own fruit and sees everything from berry to bottle. The interesting thing, I will say about that, obviously we're very proud of our vineyards and we try to make really delicious wines, but for heaven's sake, if you don't like Silverado, don't try it again next year because it's the same vineyards and it's the same winemaker.
You're not experimenting.
If you love Silverado Vineyards, you can always count on us because it's the same vineyard and the same winemaker.
Okay, well, I'm a big fan, so you'll probably hear me saying that throughout the I'm like, oh, I love this wine because, big fan of Silverado, always have been. Laura, you are our cheese lady. I say that only because that's your Instagram and I love it. What led you into this fascination with this particular fermented product? Because we're into other fermented products, but
we are indeed. Yeah. I just have to say, by the way, that what I like about Silverado Vineyards and the wines is not just the wines themselves, but the fact that they are reliably similar because of the vineyard provenance. That makes them really a lot easier to pair with cheese, which makes my life much more enjoyable. Anyway, so, I got into cheese pretty much because it got into me. And I have always loved it. I was in a different field prior to this. I was in television news behind the scenes and always kept my eye out on all things food. But cheese really caught my fancy. And so I set out to write a book about American cheese, specifically about 20 years ago. And at the time, I think not that many people knew that there were artisan cheeses being made in the US. And I, including all of my friends who thought I'd lost my mind leaving television news to write about American cheese. They did not know what there was to write about single wrap slices.
Right.
And,
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. But anyway, I wanted to prove them wrong. And so I ended up writing 55 profiles of American cheesemakers. And within that, I actually set out to answer my own questions about cheese, figuring that many Americans had the same ones, that, we knew that it went on top of a pizza or on a hamburger, but really what more than that? And how do you use it and all of that? And where does it come from? And, I just set out to answer all those questions. And then my publisher asked me to write recipes for those cheeses. Well, I had never written a recipe before, but I said, sure, I can do that. Anyway, so that led to my first book, which is essentially a cookbook, as are the others that have followed, all of course using cheese. But really what has emerged since 20 years fast forward to now is that what I thought might happen or might be happening, which was a renaissance or maybe just a birth of American cheesemakers and cheese making, has happened. And that's really fueled me all this time.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I can't wait to hear about the cheeses you chose too, because you didn't have exact producers, and we kind of are all going to explore that together. So we will get into the tasting. So for those of you at home, the way that this is going to work, we are going to talk about the wine and taste the wine. And then we're going to taste the cheese with the wine and then kind of talk about how those two pair together. So up first, we are talking about the Miller Ranch Sauvignon Blanc. Like I said, I've warned you, but I love this wine. I love this wine. I always have. I think it's just such a great classic Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc, and it just is extraordinarily just palate friendly, food friendly. The wines recommended for this are a fresh goat cheese or a triple or double cream brie. So let's start with you, Russ, if we can talk a little bit about this wine, how it represents Napa Valley and especially Miller Ranch, because that's a special place.
Right. So it's special for a number of reasons. Obviously, it's the first spot that Ron and Diane found in the Napa Valley they wanted to settle on. And in fact, that's what they did. They settled in a beautiful old farmhouse just there to the south of Yountville. The vineyard itself is in between Hopper Creek, where it comes out of Yountville, and the Napa River, and really right across the river from the Silverado Vineyard. So we're literally connected. But it always reminds me of how complex the Napa Valley is. So it's on the downside of the Napa River, where there's been a lot of river wash. And so it's filled with gravel and clay and a mixture of all kinds of soil types. And it reminds me that the Napa Valley has over 100 soil orders in this little tiny 25, 30 mile stretch that's only about a half a mile, wide at its narrowest. And over half of the world's soil orders. I don't think people actually kind of realize that when they think about this little tiny valley, that we have such complexity. On this vineyard, we actually have at least 6 distinct types of soils. Now, why is that important? Well, the vines respond very, very differently to the underlying soil types, and they really behave differently. So we bring the wine in and actually ferment each block with what we think is the appropriate yeast, which enhances kind of what that block seems to be giving us. So for example, there's one block that gives us this just intense sort of lime and lime skin aromas. There's another block that gives us a little bit of kind of tangelo and almost sort of an orange liqueur. So I always say if it just happens that they come in at the right time and we've got those 2 tanks fermenting in a corner, it's kind of like margarita corner for us at the winery. And then obviously green melon and all of the rest of the classic citrus that you think about when you think about Sauvignon Blanc, like ruby grapefruit and sweet lemon. So what I love about it is that John Emmerich, our winemaker, likes to call it the Goldilocks vineyard site for Sauvignon Blanc. If you get a little bit colder, if you get a little bit closer to the bay, it kind of carries the wine a little bit more towards what we're used to from New Zealand. Those more peppery aromas and flavors. And if you get around the Yountville knob, it gets a little bit warmer, so it gets a little more tropical. And we just like this citrusy, zippy, sweet spot in the middle.
Yeah.
And I think that really is it's just a classic sort of maybe American style of Sauvignon Blanc, not New Zealand,
it's classic.
Not French.
It's the just right. I like the Goldilocks, the just right of that mix of those things we're looking for, and kind of does represent, I think, a classic, not only American but almost Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc. But it still has a lot of great layers and complexity. So this is pretty. So let's talk about the cheeses. Let me grab my cheese plate. And yeah, I made a very pretty cheese plate. Hopefully Laura's going to tell us like the do's and don'ts of a good cheese plate.
I'm very impressed. You need no guidance at all.
Oh, thank you. I was like, I have rosemary. I'm going to throw some on there because it makes it look pretty. So we're going to start with a goat cheese for Sauvignon Blanc. Let
me just say, when it comes to pairing cheese and wine, well, I say cheese and wine. You all say wine and cheese. I know. But when it comes to tasting, it's really important to taste the wine before you taste the cheese, because the cheese has much greater impact on the wine than the wine does on the cheese, most of the time, not always.
Okay, so everybody should take a sip of wine.
Everyone should take a sip of wine, indeed. Of their margarita, apparently, not their
margarita. Well, I mean, now that he said that, I'm like, oh.
Exactly.
No. But I like it. I like a good margarita. This is a bit strong, which is nice, right?
Yeah, just add salt, right? No, please.
Yeah.
Okay, so
wonderful.
the classic pairing is Sauvignon Blanc and goat cheese. Okay, and you know, when you taste the Sauvignon Blanc, you can sort of see why. Sauvignon Blanc has this one anyway, has kind of a lemony characteristic quality to it, right? It's tangy, it's, you know, nice acid, but also fruit. Fresh goat cheese has very much the same kinds of characteristics. And so they just go really, really nicely together. And there are different there are variations on goat cheeses. What did you get today?
I got an herbed one. I forget what it was called. It has a little bit of herb on the.
Okay, which is great.
But it's a fresh goat cheese.
Yes.
From California. Forget what I write down.
Well, that's right.
Start with a C.
No, but what's great?
No, it wasn't Chanel. It wasn't Laura Chanel.
No, it wasn't, because she doesn't make. I don't know which one is made with the herbs on it, to be honest. But
I tried to remember it, and then I went through all the others. So
not to worry. No, I was really asking the style, actually, not the brand.
It's fresh, and it doesn't have. You know, sometimes goat cheeses have like they're white on the middle, and they're kind of a darker on the outer. This does not have that. It is just pure white with the.
Right. So that speaks to its freshness and or fresh style, not freshness.
Okay.
And there's no rind. So when as compared with a more aged cheese, which will have that rind, I think that you might be talking about. Okay. So when I talk about pairings like this, what I say, just kind of a rule of thumb, is that lighter, meaning the wine, means whiter, meaning the cheese, and whiter means fresher style, so like a fresh goat cheese. So that's the style that's going to go with a lighter style wine, a whiter cheese. Okay, does that make sense? And so I actually got one that has crushed olives in it. This is made by Laura Chanel, actually.
Okay. Oh, cool.
And I did that because I think with a lot of styles of Sauvignon Blanc, you can get away with that. And I felt like this went really nicely with the Miller Ranch Sauvignon Blanc. But I'm guessing that Russ probably got a fresh goat cheese with nothing in it, or am I wrong, Russ?
I absolutely did. I took your advice and I got the that Cypress Grove, and it's so creamy. It's amazing, but there's something about the quality of it, I think, that really pops up the sort of lime skin in the wine, which I really think is terrific. It's really, you know, it really, to me, bends the wine around it, which is really, really cool.
That is really cool. Gwendolyn, how about you? What happened for you?
Yeah, the herb, I don't know if it's the herb and the goat cheese, but it brought out all the melon parts of this wine. So like actually the lime the citrus was less, and then I got more of that rich tropicalness coming through. I don't know if the herb is matching with the herb.
So you know what's so cool is that normally when I do pairings with people, we all have the same wines, or obviously the same wines, but also the same cheeses. And what I just heard from the two of you that I just have not heard before in my position, which I'm just loving, is the fact that that you find the different cheeses bring out different characteristics in wine. What you hope doesn't happen is that the wine goes south, which in all of our cases, that has not happened, thank goodness.
No, I'm really hoping the wine doesn't go south.
Yeah, I'll bet you are. Because of the Disney provenance of Silverado Vineyards, I was thinking that maybe your slogan or your tagline is the second happiest place on earth.
Yeah. It's true. Oh my God. Well,
and so we want to keep it that way. We want to make cheese and wine pairings. Anyway, so basically just the fresher style goat cheese and a Sauvignon Blanc is a great way to go.
And I feel like those kind of complement each other, whereas we're going to move into the brie or the triple creamer. And I feel like that's rich and creamy versus this kind of zippy style where it kind of contrasts a little bit.
Well, it does. And so to be honest, normally I wouldn't recommend a triple cream or a double cream with Sauvignon Blanc. In fact, I rarely do. The reason I did it in this case is really kind of to point out the contrast, but also, you know, California Sauvignon Blancs in particular are made in all different styles. Some are made kind of like Chardonnay, where they're oaked and they're just much bigger wines. And that's where a triple cream might come in, or does come in actually, or just a brie-like cheese. And so with the Miller Ranch, maybe less so, but I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. So one question for you is, we need to get this cheese in. I mean, I just kind of use my fingers for the goat cheese, but you know, we've got bread, we've got artisan crackers, we've got, you know, what is there a preference? Is there something that goes better with different cheeses? What is the vessel that should get this cheese into our mouth?
It's such a great question. I mean, the safest vessel is that slice of baguette that you have there, the bread. So it's very neutral, and that's really kind of what you're looking for when you're doing pairings. You don't want a third sort of flavor in there. However, the two crackers that you were holding up are also neutral in the cracker category.
Cracker world.
Yeah, exactly. But they do, you know, crackers are toasted basically, you know, they're baked, and so they have that kind of toastiness to them. So that does introduce another element of flavor, which depending on the wine you're tasting may or may not work. And so I love cheese and crackers in the, you know, but when I'm focusing on pairing and really focusing on the wine, I tend to go for the neutral bread.
Okay.
You know, or in my case, very often I have none at all.
Yeah, yeah, I've used a spoon before.
Yeah.
I'm just going to focus my cheese on my cheese. So, so this creamy one, so I think I mentioned to you before, I have the Fromage d'Affanois, which is a wine I've been familiar with for a long time. You can find it in so many stores, which I like. It's affordable, and they always called it like the double cream that tastes like a triple cream.
True.
Yeah.
You know, I almost picked that up today for the exact same reason. It's just a great go-to, really great and very consistent. You know what you're going to get. It really doesn't change in a good way. And so I got Mount Tam made by Cowgirl Creamery. I decided to go for the gusto here. This is a triple cream that really tastes a lot like butter. And what's wrong with that? Even if it doesn't go with the Sauvignon Blanc, that's okay.
Well, mine is amazing with the Sauvignon Blanc. I feel like I'm getting now. Yep.
Okay. I know you're supposed to be running the show, Gwendolyn, but can I ask a question?
Jump in.
So I got the Cowgirl as well.
Oh.
And so the first question I have is crust or no crust?
You mean rind, right? Or rind?
Rind or no rind? I mean, what are we supposed to be doing?
Too. That's a good question.
I think it's a great question. So the answer is yes and no, although that wasn't exactly how you phrased your question. But basically, the reason is because a cheese like this, over time, the first thing to really kind of go to deteriorate is the rind. So it gets a little ammoniated. Well, that not only does that not taste good, it really makes a wine taste horrible. But a healthy rind like the one I have in my piece here, I love it, but it does change the pairing either way. So what I encourage everybody to do is to try the cheese without the rind first, and then with the wine, and then try it with the rind and try it with the wine and see how the pairing changes, because inevitably it will, if for no other reason than that the rind has texture. You know, it's got that kind of toothsomeness versus the creaminess underneath the rind. So that changes the experience with the wine too.
Are there any cheeses where the rind is just should be avoided? Are there certain cheeses where it's just not good to eat that part, like the harder cheeses that we get into?
Yeah, I mean, all rinds, as one cheesemaker that I know says, you know, the magic happens in the rind, because that's what makes the cheese what it is. However, as the longer a cheese sits on the aging shelf, the more it picks up the aromas and the flavors of the cellar. So it's just kind of this musty dustiness. Plus, it's very crusty. So the word that Russ used was actually a good one. Yeah. I don't feel like it enhances the flavor of the cheese. But what I always suggest though is to try the rind. It won't hurt you. You might not like how it tastes, but it won't hurt you unless it's wax. Don't try that one. And and go from there. But generally speaking, I'd say the harder the cheese, the less edible the rind is likely to be.
Okay. Well, I really enjoyed this because I thought this was interesting. It brought out more of that acidity and lime, whereas my goat cheese kind of brought out more of the melon. It was, again, that kind of difference.
So I found it brought out some richness in the wine. Russ, what was your experience with this cheese in your wine?
Absolutely. When I was having it without the rind, it just reminded me of all the hard work we do to leave the wine on the lees for the entire time that's in the cellar, because it picks up that, even though we're not in wooden barrels, we're picking up that what we call atelasis, which is that, the leesy contact with the wine over time gives a little bit more broadness and creaminess to the Sauvignon Blanc, which I don't usually think about so much. But the creaminess and the cheese really matched up with that. It was pretty mouth-watering. What I really loved was having the rind, because we always talk about the Miller Ranch having a certain kind of salty minerality to it. And boy, once you got that rind from the cheese, that really popped it all up, and you kind of got that perfect sort of ruby grapefruit character and that salty minerality of the wine. So I thought it was interesting. It was like almost like having two cheeses in one.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice. This is fantastic. Okay, those are delicious. Let's move on to the Merlot. So Russ, this Merlot comes from Mount George Vineyard. There's another estate wine. Can you tell us a little bit about the Merlot? And it's supposed to be going with the gruyere or a goat cheddar, which I'm excited to talk about. But tell us a little bit about the Merlot in St. George and the style.
Sure. So, that the history of Mount George is kind of interesting. Mount George is what we hope is still a dormant volcano. And it's just due east of the town of Napa. And this vineyard sort of climbs up the foothills from about a 6-degree slope to up at the top about a 20-degree slope, right up the side of this beautiful site. Coombsville is our newest little baby appellation in Napa. It was designated in 2012, so that was the first time we got to use the word Coombsville on the label. And Mount George, our site, the Mount George Vineyard, is the oldest site planted to grapes in that appellation, and has a terrific history. One funny story is that when we were researching the site, we actually discovered that William Watson was the guy that originally planted the property, but apparently his wine business wasn't really terrific. So he ended up distilling the wine and trying to sell it as brandy. But then it turned out that nobody really wanted brandy during the gold rush. Everybody wanted whiskey. So in the first really truly awesome example of Napa marketing, he decided to change the name to Wine Whiskey. And so he was selling wine whiskey. So it actually was originally known as the Whiskey Ranch, but Diane just didn't think that was really very nice. And so we honored the volcano that gives us these fantastic Coombsville gravelly loam by naming it Mount George.
Well, and I love Merlot. Yeah, this Merlot kind of reminds me that I really like Merlot. Like good Merlot, my favorite Merlot. It just it kind of Merlot's been up and down, but this is just so pretty and beautiful.
Right, it's exactly right. And what you really want with Merlot is, the challenge with Merlot, and it's why they love it in Bordeaux, is that it's a grape that gets its sugar really fast, right? Yeah. It's always going to ripen. Well, here in California, we just don't have that problem. We don't have a whole bunch of cold weather that we're dealing with. So the challenge is getting those sugar, as the sugars ripen, you want the flavors in the skin to ripen at the same time. And the lovely thing about Mount George is it's really right down on the San Francisco Bay, our huge air conditioner. And so we end up having those sugars and those beautiful flavors in the skin all developing at the same time. And actually, that was a long journey for us. We made Merlot from the very beginning, but it took us about 25 years to figure out that there were 2 blocks on this one site that were just primo Merlot sites. And that's the great joy of working with an estate, is you can do that work and really find out where the best sites is. So it's a K block and M block down there at Mount George. And they're just, I love how, how Cab is all very stone fruit, cherries and plums and stuff. I really love how Merlot is always like that blue fruit, macerated blueberries and black fruit, so it's Merlot is the dessert of great classic red wines. I think it's just so delicious and so soft in your palate.
Yeah, it's very approachable. So, and I love this. It's very, very balanced. So, and I feel like it's a perfect cheese red, because reds can sometimes be challenging. So, Laura, you chose a goat cheddar, which I've never had, and also a gruyere. Mm-hmm. So, can you tell us? Let's start with the gruyere. Okay. What about this cheese works so well?
Well, again, I'm kind of taking into account what wines I'm pairing, whose wines, not what wines. So in the case of the Mount George, I knew that it has what I love about it is that it's super balanced, which is, you know, all wines should be, but not all are. And so, or they tend, or they are deliberately focused on one characteristic or another.
Or they're too young.
So a red wine like this in balance to me means that the tannins are really well integrated, but yet there's structure. So you've got the nice fruit, like what Russ was talking about, but you also have this really beautiful, what I call a base note, like this foundation that it kind of rests on. And so that to me gives more cheese choices to go from. Now I wouldn't, to be honest, I wouldn't normally choose Gruyere for a red wine. Typically it would be either a lighter red wine or it would be a white wine. But I don't know, I guess just call it curiosity. Something told me that there were certain characteristics in the Gruyere which can be kind of nutty and kind of brown buttery, that and almost a little bit, well, kind of when you think of brown butter, that kind of toastiness, that would maybe work with the Merlot. But I have not yet tried it.
Okay, well, you need to. I've tried this wine. It is, so you try that. It's very soft, and I feel like, and as soon as I was tasting this, because I have a cave aged, I said cave aged, but you know, it's correct. Cave aged Gruyere. So it does have that smoky, and the brown butter. When you said that, I was like, yeah, it's like brown butter being browned, I guess.
Right.
But just so textured and interesting, and I didn't even think I liked Gruyere, but now I do.
Oh my gosh, it's a notorious melting cheese. It's fantastic.
Well, yes, I've had it melted, which is fine, but I don't think I've had it
plain,
just on its own that I've enjoyed. But maybe I haven't just gotten a good one. This is so good.
Well, also when you have, you know, some oak on any red wine, like you will, most of them, sometimes a cheese like this can not exaggerate the oak, but bring out the oak fruit or the oak spices, excuse me, the kind of the sweeter, sometimes the vanilla or that kind of thing. And I sort of thought that might round out the fruit a little bit more in the wine, but I don't know. I'd be curious what Russ thought of it.
What kind did you get? I have a
call. Well, so you know, Laura, you mentioned hazelnuts, which is so spot on, and it's so funny because when John and Elena, our winemakers, are looking at the barrel, and we do this every other year. We get a lineup of barrels that we want to see if we want to bring in to be part of the program. One of the things that we really look for is, particularly for Merlot, is a little less of that vanillin, which we think can be a little bit, you know, can kind of drive that boysenberry quality of Merlot right into kind of boysenberry syrup, right? We actually are looking for that roasted hazelnut quality in the wines. And I thought it just nailed it. I mean, to me, it just reminded me of it kind of took the wine back to what I love about tasting wine out of barrel, because it had that the nuttiness, and the cheese kind of took me back to that part of the wood. But I was more impressed by your brown butter analogy, because if you think about what really makes Merlot awesome, it's those fantastic oily herbs. And when you think about butter and oily herbs, you kind of, well, I'm sort of done. You're kind of, you know, it's like a meal. So I really loved how it really popped up those sort of particularly rosemary, minty kind of qualities in the aromas of the wine. And you know, the Gruyere is not too fat, and the Merlot is not too tanniny. So I thought the weights were really terrific together. I thought it was really for taking a flyer. I thought you did an amazing job.
Oh, well,
I did too. I think the weight and weight is a really great analogy. I mean, great point to make, because those did match. So I've never had goat cheddar.
Mm-hmm.
What makes goat cheddar different from cow cheddar or?
Well, really, it's the milk source, you know. So cow's milk cheddar is made from cow's milk. Goat's milk cheddar is made from goat's milk, and what that means is goat's milk tends to be a little bit tangier, a little bit less fatty, and the cheddars, I find, goat cheddars, are a little more. I mean, they're all cheddars are pretty savory, frankly, but I find them. Well, I find them really intriguing, actually, and very wine friendly. And part of it is a little bit of that tang, but also that earthiness, savoriness, and maybe just a little bit of sweetness on the end too. And it's also a cheese that kind of just keeps going. It has some complexity, more than it might seem. at first.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that with the Merlot, which also is kind of the same thing in wine, where you think Merlot, oh, it's not going to have that much complexity, until you taste one like this and you realize, my goodness, it has so much going on, and it keeps going, and it keeps revealing itself. And that's how I feel about goat cheddars too. So that's kind of why I chose it.
I kind of want to make a grilled cheese out of this tomorrow. But I mean, I know that it tastes really good on its own, but I also feel like it would be so good just melted with bread. It's just,
I disagree.
But it matches really well with this Merlot too. I feel like, the Merlot just, it has, the structure kind of comes out a little bit more with this one than the Gruyere.
Right. It makes I would say, if anything, actually, in a not so great way, it might minimize the fruit a little bit more than, not for you?
No, I agree, but I feel like because this is not a super tannic, it's not a super, everything's so mellow in this wine, having that is not a bad thing. I think it actually is pretty. It kind of gives me that acidity boost and a little bit of tang from the wine too, which I like.
Russ, what cheese did you get, or did you?
So I on your recommendation, I went out and found the Sierra Nevada one, and it's wow. So can I be like super confused about cheese for just a second here? Because I thought, how we always like cheddar, I have in my mind some little tiny village in England or something,
or Wisconsin.
Is cheddar, what is cheddar? Is that like a place or?
Yeah, how is this different from goat cheese? Like we call it goat cheese, but then you have goat cheddar.
Yeah.
Well, so goat cheese is generic. It just means the cheese is made from goat's milk. Mm-hmm. So cheddar is both a noun and a verb. So to make cheddar, you have to cheddar the cheese. And there's a process that I don't have to go into here, but basically it has to do with how the cheese is made into that. It's called cheddaring, and it's basically the stacking of the curds, which mat together, then they mill it into tiny little pieces, and then they scoop those up, they salt them, and they put them into a cheese mold or square, whatever shape it's going to be. So that's the very brief version of cheddaring. And so, but yes, it did originally come from a place in England where it's no longer made. And so that is where it originated, but I'm guessing that it originated there because they came up with this method for making that style of cheese. So this cheddar, this goat cheddar, presumably is made in that style.
So I'm so glad you explained that. So so I wasn't wrong to feel that it was kind of salty. I mean, compared to the goat cheese that, that I have with Sauvignon Blanc, I thought this was a little more salty, and I thought the salt actually pushed up like the blueberry, the berry quality. You know how it's very contrasty, and I thought it really, really pushed the fruit forward, and it was really mouthwatering. I mean, the whole combination was really. I thought it picked up. It made the acidity in the wine kind of carry a little bit further and made it really super mouthwatering. Salt and fat, you can't go wrong.
No. And also, this kind of reminds me texture-wise of provolone. I don't know if that's the wrong thing. Just texture-wise, the flavor is totally different, and I enjoy this more. But just from the cutting of it. But
yeah, well, in this case, all three of us have different ones, and so mine comes from Wisconsin, from a relatively small farm there called LeClaire Farms, and this is raw milk, the one I have. It's not pasteurized. And I think what you're referring to, I know the provolone texture, I think you're right. I mean, at least it compares with mine as well. I don't want to say it's rubbery, but it has that sort of, because provolone can be.
But I get that the desire to kind of melt it or something. I don't know if that's it, but I have the Mount Sterling.
Yeah.
Mount Sterling, which is also raw. Is that from California?
No, that's from Wisconsin too, I believe.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great.
So, and then Russ has the California version, which sounds like it's saltier than yours or mine, Gwendolyn. So there you have it. You have different experiences based on it can be called the same thing like goat cheddar, but different experiences.
Yeah, but it's all delicious apparently. So let's move on to the Cabernet. Cabernet is a classic for Silverado. Again, it's a personal favorite, in case I didn't mention how much I enjoy Silverado wines. So we're going to be pairing that with either a Parmesan or a sharp cheddar. So tell us a little bit, though, about Silverado and the style of its estate Cabernet, Russ.
So, this is one where this is the winemaker wine, because obviously with so many of our wines, like the first two that you've had, they're single vineyard, and we're really trying to focus on expressing what the vineyard is giving us. But you're right to point out that this is really Silverado's classic, and we get to make those decisions. On Mount George, which is kind of the winery's little spice rack, we've got not only Cabernet and Merlot, but we also have Cab Franc and Malbec and Petit Verdot. And then, of course, here surrounding me at the winery in Stag's Leap is, let me see, Cab, and a little bit more Cab. And the Cabernet here is actually our very own Cabernet. So after about 2.5 decades of field selection, we actually created our own version of Cabernet, our own clone, which is called the Silverado Disney clone. It's UCD 30 if all of you want to order it on the University of California Davis Nursery website. And we also have that clone down at Mount George as well. So it's a blend of 2 vineyards. It's in this case a blend of 4 varietals. We don't have any Malbec in this one. And every year we're just trying to focus on what we think makes Cabernet from Napa really classic. So that sort of intense plum and that intense sort of ripe cherry flavor and that beautiful sort of, I love the greenness of Cabernet if it's appropriate. So that kind of dried herb greenness, and then kind of wrapping through that just a little hint of the vanilla that we were talking about earlier from the barrels. And so the way that we get to that is really, doing intense sorting of the fruit. We use this fancy thingamajig called an optosorter, which actually measures pigment density berry by berry, and kicks out stuff that we don't like. And so it's a really intense process, and really sets us up. Everything that we do in terms of farming really sets us up for some really happy decisions blending in the winery. So this is really our combination of our 2 great vineyards, the Mount George Vineyard and the Silverado Vineyard here, where we get our name, and great Cabernet with just a splash of Merlot and a little hint of Cab Franc and some Petit Verdot as well.
It is a very pretty wine. I always feel like it tastes like Cabernet, meaning that it has that dried herb character. It has just that structure. It has the black fruit and the red fruits, and it just has everything that you want in a Cabernet, and it's well balanced. So, Laura, you chose 2 cheeses. You chose a extra sharp cheddar and a Parmesan. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have guessed extra sharp cheddar, but tell us about why that works.
Well, I wouldn't have either, but somehow it came out anyway. Yeah, so so really what I would choose, if I had the universe of cheeses before me, it would be an English style cheddar. And what distinguishes an English style cheddar is one that is literally wrapped in cheesecloth. They call it bandage wrapped or cloth bound, or those phrases are what you see a lot. And so it's aged those cheeses are aged for about a year, maybe longer, and they take on a real earthiness to them. And in general, what I found is that those go really nicely with Cabernet. So I was kind of trying to figure out what all of us could get anywhere that could also go with Cab. And I thought, well, when I think of extra sharp, I think of kind of almost bitter. And I thought, well, that's not a good idea. But then I tried it and I thought, either my palate has changed or extra sharp cheddars have changed, or both. But I thought it had a mellowness to it, but yet enough stuff going on that maybe it would work with the Cab. You tell me.
Well, I got one that apparently had a smoky thing to it. I didn't think I meant to do that, but it had a smoky thing to it. And I just tasted though, and I thought that might blow it, but it didn't. Tannins went a little bit lower, and I got a lot of fruit, which is kind of interesting. I was not expecting that.
Well, what you did was you got the grilled steak, the barbecued steak,
right,
all in one bite in the form of cheese that would certainly go with this Cabernet, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
But actually, I think it's, I think it works again because the Cab is so well integrated. The tannins are so well integrated in the Cabernet, even though it's a big wine and it's got lots of life and everything. Yeah. One thing you have to be careful of with a big wine is that it doesn't overtake the cheese. It's the one wine where that can certainly happen, and so so you have to kind of find that balance. But I'm curious, Russ, what cheese did you get? What kind of cheddar or what? Yeah.
Well, I got the I'm trying to get my notes right here, but I think what I got was the Beechers. Is that what you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just am reminded. So what I love about it is because we've talked about this before. One of the challenges with cheese and red wine is the tannin in red wine.
Yes.
Yeah. Right? I mean, that is, but this really worked. I mean, it was amazing. It reminds me, is that a classic phrase from, who was it? Who was it that said, one of the great chefs, I mean, who said, fat makes everything better. Mm-hmm. And this reminds me of that because
what chef didn't say that, really? Yeah. Probably Julia Child.
It was probably Julia Child. It was definitely Julia
Child saying that.
Yeah, I can hear her saying it, actually. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Fat makes things taste better. And I really feel like there's just the right amount of fat in this to really, and the right amount of oomph in it to really tame the tannins and not create like a civil war with the tannins. You know what I mean? It's like, it works. It's not like some big skirmish in your mouth. So I love it. I think this Beecher is amazing.
Yeah, I'm very impressed with my pairing too. The other cheese you chose, Laura, was a Parmesan.
Uh-huh.
I know you got an American one, which is very cool. I have the Italian one. But why does this work?
I changed my mind. I ended up going with the Italian because I had Parmigiano in my fridge as well.
Of course you do.
So again, it was a little bit risky on my part because a cheese like Parmigiano Reggiano is not just salty, but it also has kind of a sweetness to it, which most people don't think about. But when you open a brand new wheel of Parmigiano Reggiano, that's when you know it actually emits these esters of pineapple. And so it can be like kind of like roasted pineapple, but it also is super savory. And then it does have that saltiness. That's why we grate it on pasta and everything else. And so sometimes that amount of salt can really exaggerate the tannins in a red wine. So it was, as I said, it was a little bit risky on my part, but the reason I did it is because lately I've been trying some of these harder kind of grating cheeses, as long as they're not too salty, like Pecorino Romano is all about salt, so I wouldn't recommend that. But this I figured might go actually really nicely with the Silverado Vineyards Cabernet, better than I'm kind of anticipated. And actually I had a little preview taste and I actually really liked it. Did you?
Yeah, no, you had warned me. You're like, it might be a little bit sweet, and it brought out so much fruit. I feel like in the Cab. Russ, what did you have?
So, Laura, what did you recommend for me here? Because it's really amazing. I'm not sure. It's the Barely Buzzed. You know, the beehive one that you. Which isn't really like Parmesan necessarily.
No, but it's not. It's not. Oh, did I? Well, so I threw you a ringer, apparently.
You did.
I love, that was, yeah, I know where that came from. So, well, that was on one of the many lists. So Barely Buzzed is a cheese made in the famous cheese-making state of Utah. And yeah, don't you know? It's made by Beehive Cheese Company. And what they make is they make a base. It's actually a cheddar. Mm. And then what they do is they coat it with espresso and a little bit of lavender oil. And I like the espresso coated cheeses with red wines. You would think it might clash, but actually I really love how it kind of brings out so much in the wine that you might not have gotten on its own.
Setting aside the fact that I'm completely in love with the wine and cheese pairing that's called Barely Buzzed, it's an amazing combo. So I'm afraid I sort of blew it on the Parmesan thing, but I totally agree with you how and that's one of those where the crust is fantastic, and everything just kind of works with a really, really big red. So I'm off on my own barely buzzed tangent here. I'm sorry.
Well, so it's just a rule of thumb, not a rule of thumb, but a recommendation I guess I would give is that for anybody who's looking to pair cheese with their kind of bigger style red wine, barely buzzed is widely available and absolutely worth seeking out to go with that wine.
Yeah. Yeah, these were all, I mean, there was also interesting and they were different. I know those at home who might have had cheeses might have had something different and a different experience. But I think that one thing to just kind of look at is just that a food can change a wine and wine can change a food. But especially with cheeses, I just feel like cheeses are pronounced just like wine is in many ways, and they can really do very well together. Sometimes they don't, but most of the time you can kind of experiment with them to see what happens. So thank you so much. So I had a question from Scriven in Tallahassee, and the reason I'm calling this out is because I'm from Tallahassee, so I wanted to do a hometown shout out. But his question, I'm gonna read it because it's great, but then I have a different way of proposing it to you. But a client's dropping by your home this evening. You have 1 hour to plan what's an impressive, low risk, high reward selection. So I think the way I want to phrase that question to you would be, Russ, tell me one wine that you would put out if you had a multitude of cheeses, foods. What are you confident that wine, which wine would go with many? And then Laura will move to you and you can give me that one cheese to have on hand that can kind of match with whatever somebody brings over. So Russ, let's start with you.
So, I have to say that, of course, what I would do is sparkling wine, which Silverado doesn't make. But let me shamelessly shill a wine that everybody knows and actually everybody loves, which is Chardonnay. It's still the most gifted wine in the United States. It's the wine that I always bring to people if I don't know what kind of wine drinker they are, if I don't know if they're a Pinot or a Cab drinker, I always bring Chardonnay because it's just great. Chardonnay is just great always. Chardonnay, I always like to say, is like pizza. There's kind of no bad Chardonnay. And so I would say that's a great pairing because you've got some bright acidity in Chardonnay. Ours isn't particularly oaked, but if you manage to get one that is oaked, that complexity can go with cheese. I also like it that it's, not everybody likes frizzy sparkling wines, but there's enough sort of atolysis and creaminess that we talked about earlier when we were talking about Sauvignon Blanc. Most Chardonnays are barrel fermented, so they're stirred and the lees is all stirred, and it gets that beautiful sort of brioche kind of smell to it, which is awesome, and a little bit thicker palate. So it kind of works the waterfront in terms of cheese pairing. I happen to like it because you don't have to worry about the perfect thing to go with tannin and red wine. You've just got a beautiful, bright, citrusy, lemony, brioche kind of wine that you can kind of work into whatever cheese you think you can get your hands on that's impressive.
Got it. So for last minute people, just get a case of Silverado Chardonnay on hand. Laura, your turn. What cheese should be on hand in case somebody brings a wine, any wine, and you want to serve a cheese? Is there one that kind of is the best that might match with nearly everything?
Yeah, well, so God, it's so hard. But there are actually two that came to mind. Is that cheating? But one of them is a cheese called Humboldt Fog, and it's a goat cheese made in California. And but it's not just any goat cheese. What I have found, that cheese just completely blows me away in terms of its wine friendliness. It goes with white, it goes with red, it goes really well with Chardonnay. And it is just, and almost everybody loves that cheese, even people that don't like goat cheese. And it so happens actually that same company called Cypress Grove also makes a cheese that everybody likes, completely different style. It's not goat's milk, and it's called Lamb Chopper. And it's a sheep's milk Gouda, and it goes extraordinarily well with Chardonnay, but you can kind of inch it toward the Pinot Noir end of the spectrum as well. And so if somebody brings a red, you've got, you kind of have it covered with that cheese. With both of those cheeses though, they really are fabulous go-to cheeses that I would highly recommend for almost any wines.
That's fantastic. for those that might not be able to find those just in other parts of the country, I feel like, so I've always liked sheep's milk, such as like Petit Basque or, a Manchego family of sheep's milk. Do you think that sheep's milk is kind of one of those that kind of can go either way, or do you find it better with whites or reds?
Yeah, well, it depends, but they actually, yes, it can. Sheep's milk cheeses can go either way. I was going to say Manchego, actually. What I have found is that aged sheep's milk cheeses go really well with older red wines. So that's not really your question, but when you get into older ones, that's where the sheep's milk cheeses really come in, the aged ones. And so, but in terms of the Tallahassee question, with the cheeses I mentioned are pretty widely available. Yeah. Even at many grocery stores, but yeah, if not, then Manchego is a fantastic go-to cheese. Absolutely.
I haven't been back to Tallahassee in a while. I miss, but yes, those are great. So wow, this was so much fun. It's like the first time I've made a cheese plate in so long.
That's too bad.
Well, I usually like to share them, and we've kind of been stuck at home. But it was delightful to kind of learn a lot about so many different cheeses, and I have a lot to share, so we're just going to invite some people over. But thank you both so much for being here. I'm a Silverado fan, I'm a Russ fan in general, and appreciate you being here to talk about your wines. And Laura, your knowledge and enthusiasm is just delightful, so I appreciate you being here to share that. For those of you at home, if you were watching and didn't have a chance to taste the wines and the cheeses, we have this trio of wines still available on Wine.com, so you can just snag that and feel confident about having a very successful cheese plate on your own. And just thank you so much for your time and being here. And it's delicious. It's dinner, I guess. What's next, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, cheese is hearty stuff, and it can precede dinner, but it's also really great on its own with some wine. Maybe that's where you bring in the bread or the crackers. And maybe a little charcuterie, and what's better than that?
Yeah, and you can have it before dinner, and then you can bring it back after dinner and just be like the Americans and the French all together, right?
That's right. Exactly.
And what I loved about this is there wasn't a wrong answer. The journey was so great. I mean, all of these were really fun to pair up, whether they were a pairing or a contrast. It was really fun to just explore them.
Absolutely. And I learned a lot about new things, and now I'm a big fan of goat cheddar. So,
well, and I was just going to say, we didn't taste the triple cream with the red wines, and that was sort of intentional on my part, but I would encourage everybody to do that on their own, because some people like that. Other people find that it makes the wine pretty astringent, brings out the tannins. And what I found is that it depends on the wine, like so many pairings do. And so, but to try a cheese like Mount Tam or like the Fromage Dauphinois with the Merlot or the Cabernet is super fun. Whether you like it or not, it almost doesn't matter.
Right. So continue on after we leave you at home. Just, try all these cheeses with different wines, figure out what you like, what you don't like, and what works and doesn't, and how they all work together. That's a great idea. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to cheers you, even though all my glasses are empty. Thank you so much again for joining us and sharing knowledge and wines. This was delightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers.
It's both a science and a form of high art. It's made from the combination of grapes, sunlight, rain, soil, and time. It's raised up in the moments that matter. It's wine. And we are Wine.com. We have the largest wine selection in the world, online sommeliers with free advice, and now our powerful new app puts the entire world of wine in your hands. Wine.com. Seriously passionate about wine. Download our free app today.